This week, we will be talking about budget request process. We will be talking about position management and employee motivation. So there's a lot of three topics that are just absolutely amazing topics. I know that Chief absolutely loves the employee motivation and position management, and I'm really hoping that we have a lot of conversation in that arena. So I'm going to be try to be very succinct and fast on the budget process, even though that is my passion. But one of the things that I just wanted to throw out here, this is just a very uh, quick overview and timeline of what a typical budget request process looks like. One of the things that we didn't talk about, and I'm curious, just and y'all don't have to speak per se, but for the most part, unless you are a federal government entity, most state and local entities start their fiscal years in July 1st, and they go to July to June. I do know that there's a handful of states that do 2-year budgets. But if you don't start in July, can you raise your hand just so when I go through these things, I'll just go phases instead of actual months? And for your federal people that are in September, October, I'm sorry. No show of hands. So that means that everybody does go through July to June.
I
And
think
that
we
is
have
good.
three.
Oh, you do have three. Okay.
Four
So
now.
we don't go to July through June for everybody. Okay. Not a problem. So we'll just do 12-month cycle, right? And we'll start with month 1 and we'll go through to month 12. And I feel like this is important because what a lot of people don't really understand is that the budget cycle and the expense cycle don't actually align with each other. And a budget process actually takes closer to 18 months. And we see it as, well, if we start in July, we should end in July. But it doesn't work that way. It's usually 18 to 24 months. So when we look at it, we start our fiscal year and we all get a new budget, and we're told, hey, this is what your budget is for the next 12 months. But what we don't see a lot of times is that same month that you're starting your new budget, month 1, you're also being told, hey, you need to provide the chief executive entity, whoever that is, whether it's the governor, whether it's whoever the director is over at OPM at the federal level, if it's a local level, whether it's your either mayor or county commissioner, whoever that chief executive entity that actually approves your budget, he is asking in month 1, provide me your budget request for the following year. So you haven't even started this year yet, and you're already having to come up with a plan for the next year. In the education cycle, it's also a little bit further down the road, because what they do is they receive funding based on a funding formula, and that funding formula is based on their student headcounts 2 years prior. So they're even further out than the 18 months. They're closer to 2.5 years out from when they were truly request to when they actually receive. So whoever your chief executive entity, he gives a set of instructions, and he gives a set of instructions based on advice from a lot of different people, based on various studies that have gone through. But what those instructions say is he's directing you. Either he's saying, I think it's going to be a great year, I'm going to allow agencies to request a percentage increase of their budget. If it's a really bad year, he's going to say, I want every single agency to give me a plan to reduce a percentage of your budget. And then sometimes he says, you know what, we just want middle of the road. If you want to submit a request to change or implement a new program or some type of a funding redirect, is where he's going to tell you to go. So he's going to say, yep, you can create a new program, you can request it, and if I approve it, you've got to tell me where you're going to find the money within your agency to fund this new program, because I'm not going to give you more money. So those instructions are delivered on month 1 of the prior year. Then you normally have 1.5 months to develop your request based on those instructions. Sometimes those instructions can be 1 page to where it's just on letterhead. Sometimes those instructions might be an entire book, 15, 20 pages long. And you have to read through to truly understand, okay, what is allowable, what's not allowable? Are they allowing me to do capital outlay? Are they not allowing me to do capital outlay? And there's a lot of minor intricacies. Sometimes the requests say you cannot ask for personnel. Sometimes the requests say you can only ask for personnel. It's always based on whatever that agenda is for that executive, chief executive for whatever your entity is. So phase 2 in this project, you're submitting your request. They're going to give you the format, the outline of what your request is. And in a minute, we'll go over, the various types of budgets. We know that in this course, we're doing a ZBB, zero-based budget, but there are other types of budgets. He'll give what he expects to see, or she, and the layout that they want. Sometimes there is programs and websites that they require you to manually enter it. Other times they want something very similar to what y'all just did with your strategic plan. But that is going to be very different, but that is a phase in this whole process. So after he receives all these requests in, and when the reason why phase 3 waits so long, he's got an idea. So in phase 1, he had an idea of what he thinks the revenue might be, but he waits till that phase 3, and that's usually 3 months into this cycle. And he's waiting for that revenue estimate to be set, because I think I said it last week. He's going to give a conservative, his revenue estimator, whoever he's hiring to do that for him, is going to give him a conservative number, a middle of the road number, and an extreme number. And he's got to decide which way he wants to go. Well, a lot of times what the chief executive will do is look at all of the requests that have been given. And he's already, before he even talks to agencies, he's already got an idea of pet projects that he wants to. And if some of this is going to be lots of money, but he knows he really wants to do it, that might sway his decision on whether he wants to be conservative or if he wants to be extreme. And please, somebody, maybe Chief, just let me know if anybody does raise their hand, because I don't see any of that right now. So after the revenue estimate is set, that's when that chief executive entity will then start asking for meetings to discuss. And this is your sales pitch. This is your, you've got to, in the way I've always explained it when I've taught people to actually do this and submit proposals, you've got to put your 150% into your request. You need to be able to play devil's advocate and ask yourself every question possible of what is some potential of what he's going to ask me. And a lot of times this comes through the politics. If there is new legislation that had come out, or if you know that there's key buzzwords coming out, or if something recently happened in the news, anything that you think that governor, or not governor, but that chief executive authority might potentially ask you, you need to be able to answer it and justify it within your request. Sometimes this can be very hard. I will tell you, sometimes they're just off the wall and you're like, let me get back to you. The biggest problem though is when you say, let me get back to you in a meeting like this, he's saying, well, they don't really need the money. So we need to make sure that whatever we're doing in that justification meeting, we truly do know every single step of it. So that is, what did I say? That was, that's usually around month 4. of this process. So if we started our fiscal year in a July phase, this is usually happening October through November. Okay. Phase 5 does not happen until month 6. And this is so once he completes, and a lot of times entities, they will take a number of months to do these meetings. Some chief executives will only look at the top few expenditure agencies. So remember when I was showing the charts of, the top 12 that spent the most money, he might only say, I'm going to meet in person with those. And with the other 40 entities that are out there, he'll say, you know what, I'm going to rely on my analysts to meet with them and make recommendations to me, but I'm not meeting with the agency directly. And we're starting to see that happen a lot now. In the past, when I started this 30 years ago, they literally would meet with every single one, and it would take them 3 months to do it. But a lot of this now is being given to somebody else to do, and he'll just listen to his own staff. So now phase 5, we're in 6 months. He has now decided on his revenue estimate. He has decided on what projects he wants. He's decided on what the budget recommendation that he is going to give is for every one of his agencies. And I just say the State of the Union presentation to the General Assembly. However, this is going to be the same if it's in a local entity. So if it's going to be your county commissioner, well, he's going to give a recommendation to all of the other county commissioners. And he's going to say, all right, I'm recommending this budget, and this is my revenue estimate, and it is a good budget. And then there will be a set amount of time that they get to review, and they get to ask questions, and they get to recommend modifications and changes. So that's pretty much within your phase 6. It's going through all of those other people that have a say in whether it gets modified or not. Most of the time, if it does get modified, when it finally gets back to that chief executive has 2 options. He can sign it exactly the way it is and play nice with his other partners, or he can veto it. At a state level, if a budget bill gets vetoed, nobody has funding for that following year until a new bill is approved. This has happened twice in Georgia. And I know y'all know at the federal level, it happens almost every year, right? They can't get a budget passed by September 30th, and they have to go into shutdown mode until they can get a bill passed. Both times that we did this in Georgia that I have been through, the House and the Senate passed the budget bill close to the last day of session, and the governor did not like it. He vetoed it and required them all to come back to the General Assembly a month later. They did finally reconcile through their emergency session, and they were able to get a budget out, but we were cutting it very close. We were at like June 20th when we finally got a budget bill ready to go. That becomes very costly. I was very surprised both times when I was part of it that we even did it, because even at that time, and these were probably between 2002 and 2008 were both times that I went through it. It cost us well over $250,000 a day for every day that we went back into emergency session, because we had to pay everybody to be there. And not just pay them to be there, but you have to pay them the per diem to be there. And all of the other things that go along with it. Everything that was supposed to be shut down is now reopened. I don't think it's happened much here in Georgia since then, because what we do now is the House and Senate have agreements that they will pass the budget bill closer to mid-session to give time for it to be finalized. I'm sorry, I went off on tangents of that, but anyway, so once it gets signed, it then goes into final phase, and final phase usually takes a month or two, unless it's extreme executive session type issues. But that's where your actual budget and planning office, whether it's OMB, OPB, or whether it's your local budget office, they've now got to set up these budgets within their their um, their accounting system, and they have to allocate these funds to each individual entity. That does take time. Once they allocate the funds and they send them to each agency, then the agencies have to come back and they have to request allotments of funds. And what allotments of funds there are, because you get a budget of say $10 million, you're not on July 1st or month one, you are not going to get $10 million given into your bank account for you to be able to use. What you're going to get is whatever your expenses are for that month one. Some localities say we do allotments on a monthly basis. Some localities say we do allotments on a quarterly basis. A lot of times the allotments are directly related to, one, when that the overall entity expects to receive that revenue in order to be able to fund it, but two, what is the finances of the economy and things like that at that very time. So if they're not generating as much interest at that time, they may say, you know what, we can only do allotments every 2 weeks. Therefore, we're going to give you enough money to pay your people and pay your light bill and pay everything for 2 weeks at a time. That in itself becomes costly because now you're having people having to analyze more often than monthly. It's very typical for your accounting office to be analyzing how much money do we have budgeted versus expense, and are we on track? Are we overspending? Are we underspending? It's typical and common for monthly. Doing it every 2 weeks becomes very hard. Ideal scenario though, if we're not in a recession and we're doing good, quarterly allotments are pretty much what we do. They've got enough funds to give you 3 months at a time. If for some reason you have some major project that you need a lot more money up front, you can just request that in your allotment with a justification. And normally, if it's justifiable, they'll give it. So then our final phase. So now we've got all of our allocations. We've requested our first allotment. We haven't hit our July 1st yet. Our phase 8 hits. We hit our July 1st. We start that new budget. Now we're having to work on prior year budget. Our prior year's now ended. We've got to close everything out. We have to get everything ready for an auditor because every single entity will have some type of audit every year. Most years it's going to be very light, very low. But usually every 2 to 8 years, depending on what your regulations say, you're going to have an in-depth comprehensive audit. And those auditors will then spend 2 months reviewing. So, and I bring that up because the auditors, they're on month 13 and 14. However, month 13 and 14 are the same as month 1 and 2. So in your month 1, you're starting a new budget, you're requesting funds for a future budget, as well as being available and ready and preparing documents for auditors to review your prior year's budget. So you're working off of 3 budgets all at one time. Month 1 and 2 are absolutely horrible. Does that make sense to everybody? I know that was a lot of information and it was 20 minutes worth. I'm sorry. Questions? Okay. All right, so types of budgets. These are the ones that are probably the most common and most popular budgets. I'm just curious, based on show of hands, how many of y'all know what type of budgeting process you use? I wish I could see this. Let's see.
So
Matt
far,
knows.
there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Hands are coming up
Good.
like tulips.
Excellent. Okay. Um, how many of y'all truly use zero-based budgeting? And there's a reason why I asked that. One person uses zero-based budgeting. Good. Zero-based budgeting, it has been proven that even though you're requesting line item justifications, it had its purpose in prior days, but it doesn't really, it justifies why you're spending money. It doesn't justify the need to spend the money. So, and the reason why I put line item budget versus zero-based budget is because a line item budget, there is no justification required. In a line item budget, you say, I want $50,000 for rents and real estate. You don't have to justify your rents and real estate. However, in a zero-based budget, you're justifying that rents and real estate in that you're being charged $12 per square foot for, 120 square foot building. And the reason why that justification then comes in hand is you've got bean counters that will look at that $12 a square foot, and then they'll look at, well, what is the going rate in your area? And if the going rate is less, they may tell you, you know what, for this next year, we want you to look at relocating because you are paying much more. So you have, and they'll say you have two choices. You go back to your landlord and you ask them to renegotiate at fair market rates, or you look for a new place. We're not going to give you money for it. So your line item justification in a zero-based budget is a very heavily bean counter based. Okay, they're truly looking at the numbers and can you truly justify the number? Okay, in a line item budget, you don't have to worry about the number. You tell them what it is and they say okay. In a program-based budget, that is where we start looking at, okay, so what benefit are we receiving for the cost of this program? And it becomes more holistic. So we're still most of the time, because of remember that PowerPoint presentation I gave a couple weeks ago, I think, of, or maybe I haven't given that yet, never mind, of, the various accounting systems, and there is an governmental accounting set of codes that we have to do. So even though you're doing a cost versus benefit, you're still technically doing a line item. However, it's massively consolidated. So instead of you having to say, well, what's my rent versus what's my coffee versus what's my patrol car use, you're just saying, what's my cost of operations versus what's my cost per personnel. So even though you're still breaking it out, it's not as an in-depth detail, because what you're saying is, in a program, I am going to prove this in a benefit. And we've got to do this, whether it's law, whether it's some type of regulation or policy, or, this is what we found, and we've got to do this. And this is the benefit the entire state is going to receive if we do this. So then we get to the performance-based budget. And where the program-based budget is, you're going to say, so say you are a police department and that has various specialty units. Your program-based budget is going to be your investigative unit, your canine unit, your jail, your road unit. So you are going to list a budget for each one of those specific programs. However, when you look at a performance-based budget, each one of those units, even though they've got their one clear direct mission, for their unit, they're still looking at overall performance, right? So, the K9 unit, he's looking for drugs. The traffic unit, he might also be looking for drugs. So if you have a measurable performance objective that you want to reduce the trafficking of drugs down the interstate, that is your measurable performance indicator. That is a performance-based budget. So you are going to budget based on the performance of reducing drugs. Whereas in a program-based budget, you're going to be budgeting two separate things, and you might not really be able to tie to that performance indicator. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm reading Greg saying about why you do a ZBB. Yeah, it can get very confusing. And then the outcome-based budget, that's something that I don't see often. That's where they're looking at, we're going to give you money and we expect these outcomes or these results by this money that we're giving you. So whereas, we're looking at measurable performance indicators on a performance-based budget, we're saying we anticipate that we're going to reduce drug trafficking on the interstate by 10% each year. However, the outcome-based budget, we're saying we have reduced by 10% each year. Therefore, we need this money to continue. Does that make sense? Questions? Okay. So as Chief Murphy was just saying, justification of budgets is critical. So now we went over the different types of budgets. In every one of those budgets, you're still going to need to justify something. And I've just listed these things in here of various questions you need to ask yourself when you're trying to prepare a request. Why do you need it? Well, we want to reduce the drugs going up and down our interstate. Okay, but why do you want to reduce it? And continuously ask yourself that why question. And when you say, well, we want to reduce it because drugs are bad. Okay, so why are they bad? And make sure that, because like I was saying in one of the previous slides, you've got to make sure that no matter what question is thrown at you, you can think of a justifiable answer. Because if you don't have it, you're going to lose them almost immediately. Okay. I put up there any laws or regulations that need to be changed along with it. So if you're proposing a new program that goes hand in hand with the need to change a law, you need to be upfront about that, because if you get the money and you can't do it, they're going to take the money back away from you next year, and it was just a wash. You wasted your time. However, the next one is it due to recent legislation changes. If the governor was passionate about something last year, or whoever your chief executive was, they were passionate about something enough to where they changed regulations to say you must do this, but they never funded it. You now need to go back to them and you need to say, hey, this was an unfunded mandate. We have tried, and you need to throw it in there. We have tried to do this with our internal funds. We have found, other areas lacked. And if we go ahead and we pull these funds from this one area in order to be able to redirect it to this new legislation change, this is what that alter effect is going to be. We're going to see this extra happening that is going to be bad for our community. So knowing whether it's due to legislation changes, you need to include that in your request. Are there going to be people that your chief executive is going to hear about that they don't want this? You need to forewarn them ahead of time. Sometimes they won't care about it, but you need to inform them, because if you don't, they don't like being blindsided, and it turns into a political suicide. The how much do you need and how do you plan on it being funded? That I want to strongly recommend. You can allude to it throughout your request. Leave it at the very end. You need to justify your request before you throw a number out there. And the reason why I say that is sometimes numbers can be very high or very low. If it's very low, the chief executive might say, just fund it internally, and they'll never read your justification. If it's really high, they'll say, no way in hell, I don't have this money, and they'll never read your justification. Give them the justification first, then tell them how much it costs. You need to reel them in, and then after you reel them in, then you can give it out there. Does this make
And
sense to everybody?
if I could add, as a part of that reeling them um, in your justification, that's a good opportunity to include some evidence-based research, because it's more than just you, the individual, expressing your rationale or justification, but you're supporting it with, some accepted best practices or some research that you can base it on. It just makes it a stronger justification. And it's a critical part of what we look for in this class.
Yes, absolutely. Um, will you request the redirect? They're going to ask you because, especially, I mean, we've been working off of at least 15 years now that I know of that nobody has money, and especially public safety, nobody has money. So, where do you think you can get the funding from? And does it tie to your mission, vision, and strategic plan? It really needs to tie it. You need to figure out how to get those key buzzwords in from your mission, vision, strategic plan into this request. Got it?
One,
Okay.
if
Go ahead.
if I could just add to that, and I probably failed to say this in the first couple of classes when we were talking about the mission statement as well as the strategic plan. But in that mission statement, when developing it, it's really good to socialize that throughout the community that you operate, because by socializing it or by getting input and feedback from the stakeholders, kind of what's happening is you're getting buy-in to the mission statement. And so once they're bought in, that becomes an anchor point for you that is beneficial to you throughout the cycle of what we're doing in this course. So then when you develop your strategic plan, they've already bought into the mission statement. So the strategies to achieve the goals of, the purpose rather of the mission statement, it's an easier sell, if you will. And then when you are building this budget that Dr. Kerner is talking about, and you're aligning the rationale back to the strategic plan, which goes back to the mission statement, it's like fish on, right? They've already bitten on the hook, and now it's going to be hard for them to abandon that because they bought in before. So that's kind of the logic, or one channel of the logic being applied.
Absolutely. And I do it all the time. I have it up on my wall in my office because every time I want to request something, I'm like, all right, how do I make sure that it truly does tie? Um, so when we talk about what should be included in your request, no matter what type of budgeting process you're using, you really need to still do this. Your formats are going to be different, but these things, this is your cell. So when we look at, a budget is an Excel spreadsheet. Well, it's not really just an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm really hoping that y'all are seeing that when you're writing your budget proposals here. Yeah, you're doing that Excel spreadsheet, but this is more important than that sheet. Okay. All right. Position management. Where are we on time? 7:35. So can somebody tell me what the difference between position management and personnel management is?
Dr. Kerner, if I may interrupt before we go to that difference, there was a question that came up in chat,
Oh, okay.
and I think it's relevant to what we're just leaving from. And it asked, do quotes for items count as justification? And at least I'll express my thought on that. And then I'm eager to hear what of course, Dr. Kerner and the rest of you have to say as well. But I think generally the justification addresses the why, and it's at least for me, in justification, it's expressing why this item is important for us. And I think the quote just kind of answers the how much it is, which is obviously important, but to me, the justification gets more as to the why we need the funds for this, whatever the ask is.
And honestly, you bring up a perfect point. An example would that be you're trying to justify how many employees. There is peer reviewed, evidence based research on what the number of employees for a police department should be. So, what you need to be doing is looking for that research and determining, okay, I need 12, 16 patrol officers because of the formula that is recommended by, and that's literally your quote. Does that make sense? And it's the same thing. So when you get to, yes, you're for a vehicle, I need 12 vehicles at $70,000 a vehicle, and I need that $70,000 because here's the quote from that company that makes the vehicle, Ford. Is it, we're using Ford now? No, I can't remember what company we're using now. But that's really not what your justification should be. Your justification should be, I need X number of vehicles because there's been research that has proven that take home vehicles last longer, and they're not as they don't get as much wear and tear because now the patrol officer takes ownership in the vehicle and will maintain it better. And that research was, and honestly, I did research on that back in 90 something. I'm sure it hasn't changed. It may have changed, but you're looking for that evidence base. And you can prove that there has been research on this, that I need 12 vehicles because 12 vehicles is how we should best manage our agency. Does that make sense? Okay. Joe.
I understand the personnel thing. I have my justification for that, and the vehicles. I get what you're saying, but as far as like how to justify overtime and comp time and health insurance and uniforms, uh, the ammo, contractual services, that's the kind of stuff that I'm having a harder time creating a justification for. I know the cost of it. I know why we need it, but I just find it a little difficult to be able to cite that somewhere.
I'm curious, what you say, why you need it. Elaborate a little bit. Why do you need it?
I know that we need it because we use it here, and I am involved in the budgeting process here. So um, I know that we need that stuff in order to run an agency.
So specifically, I'll just kind of narrow in on one of the items that you mentioned, which was the or plain devil's advocate, by the way. Why do you need overtime?
Because police work is not a 9 to 5 job, right? We can plan for special events, but there's always sickness, illness, injury, weather-related emergencies, special event security that pops up. So therefore, I can't guarantee adequate police services with no overtime because there's always work that comes above and beyond the standard workday.
Okay.
So can
Now,
I play
I'll,
devil's advocate here?
I,
If I was the chief executive,
can I give
my
one more,
question, go
one
ahead.
more, just one more follow up to that? So let's say that you and I don't have a relationship, Joe, that goes back years and all. And while I want to believe you, what evidence can you present to me that tells me everything that you said is true?
I can provide historical data from the department. I can provide you last year's overtime request broken down by whether it's a staffing shortage, whether it's a workplace injury, whether it's special event security, whether it's dispatch overtime, personnel overtime, detective called in for an investigation, people held over for late jobs, such as a car crash that occurs at shift change. We need to keep a few people for that. So I have it all broken down to show that we can't finish the job exactly at the end of a 12-hour tour. Sometimes there's things that happen after that. And with respect to the detectives don't work a 24/7 schedule. So there's always folks on call, and crime, not to sound corny, but doesn't take a holiday. It happens at weekends, after hours, 3 o'clock in the morning. So there's always a need for people to be working on overtime.
So you've got me bought in with that historical data piece, because that does present some evidence, right? And I would say like a next level, for example, would to actually go out and do some research that supports everything that you said. I know what you're saying is true, but there may
Right.
be there may be someone who does not know. And that's kind of the audience that you want to sometimes go for, just to bring it to that elemental level of detail and justification that does not put you as the sole knower of this knowledge on the hot seat, but puts you in a community of other people through the research that you cite, as well as the historical data that you presented that I think is very valid. So I think what you just said, at least to me, constitutes a solid justification when you talked about that historical piece. And for me, the next level would just be to find someone in the world that has done some studies based on what you said, so that it's not just you, but the community.
Okay. I got it.
Can I
Yeah.
answer
Thank
that
you.
now?
Yeah, that's helpful.
So, at me as a chief executive, um, my first question to you would be, you've already just told me that you have vacancies. How come your overtime can't be funded by your vacant positions? And if you truly do need the overtime, then I'm going to take the salary of your vacant positions away from you. I'll give you the overtime money, but I'm going to take the rest away. So when you're looking at those things, and honestly, I've had this conversation with some agencies before, in that they really couldn't justify things like that. So when you're looking at salaries, be very careful of what you put in there. Because personal services, they can be moved around. Um, if for some reason one becomes higher than the other, well, we've done plenty of exercises here in Georgia on vacant positions, and we've cut millions and millions of dollars because they want just what you're saying. Does that make sense?
And if I could even add more, I, at least to me, that whole either salary savings or vacant positions, that could be one um, one subset of the justification for overtime budget dollars. But that if that constitutes all of it, then you have to assume that if you're at full staffing, you're never going to need overtime. And that actually is not true either, because we're human, right? People take vacation, they get injured, there are emergencies that come up like you talked about. So there are things that are unpredictable, but they're predictably unpredictable, that 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 are still going to require overtime. And so I think one element of the overtime is, through the vacant positions, because we all know that pushes way more overtime. But then there's also these other things that come up, even if you were fully staffed, that's still going to require overtime. And I mean, at least, you know,
Yeah.
been my experience. So,
Well,
so I just wanted to not limit it because I've been through that a couple of times where we like get at full staffing and then, people are still pressing as to why there's overtime. And I say, because police officers are human
yeah.
and life is unpredictable.
Well, and that's why I prefaced it with devil's advocate, because that's one of those things you got to really, really careful with your words, and you've got to be able to, as you're justifying it, be able to answer any question that came up. So that's one of those that, yeah, if you put it in there, that's great, but you need to now justify a second set because you just opened up a Pandora's box. Does that make sense? And unfortunately, I mean, people do it. We're all human. Matt.
So, Dr. Kerner, I just wanted to kind of direct the question at you based on the question that you raised after basically, like, I'll give you the overtime funding, but I'm going to eliminate the positions. Would a decent argument to that be something to the effect of, I mean, that in and of itself isn't going to work. That's not going to help with officer burnout. Like, we want to incentivize this position, and eliminating positions to people that are already overworked isn't the fix. Like, what would be your suggestion on combating that with without giving up ground that you've already gained, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. And this is where your strategic plan comes directly into play, right? So if you do have vacancies, you need to be able to justify in this position management, HR management side of things, you need to be able to justify, okay, we recognize, we understand we have a problem. We have vacancies. We are trying our best. And one of the things that a lot of law enforcement agencies have come to me in the past on, they then explain the process to hire. And we all know sometimes by the time a person applies through to where they're truly useful to you and they are holding a full-time position all on their own, could be close to 18 months, right? I mean, some people can get it done in 3 or 4 months, but when you're looking at, Georgia just went to a 20-week basic training program, and then you got to put 6 months on top of that for an FTO program, and then you've got to put another 3 months on top of that just for the hiring process. You've got to be able to justify and explain that as well. They're not a useful person. I need that overtime because, yes, we are filling positions. The vacancies are there, and we're doing everything we can to fill those positions. However, they do not become viable people until however many months after they're truly employed. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Not a problem. And I will tell you, things like that, you have to be able to think on your toes because you're going to come up with questions in a budget meeting, a hearing that you're like, oh my goodness, okay, I need to answer this right now. How do I answer this? And sometimes you start talking and then all of a sudden it clicks to you. But you gotta, and that's one of the reasons why I am a huge proponent in public speaking is so important for everybody. Because once you get up into these higher positions, you've got to be able to critically analyze things on the fly. Got it?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
All right.
There's a question in the chat. At least I don't fully understand it. And it is for the cost of a Glock, for example, we don't need to cite the website then. I probably lost the track of thought there.
I think when we were talking about justifications, that's where do we have to justify like all the cost, or can we just put the costs in and get justifications for why we would need to purchase those things?
I think the last thing you just said is really what we're looking for. To provide, all of it. And then the why you need it. I mean, you could go to the level of detail, as to, so if this is a new agency, then I think the conversation is more about the fact that police officers need weapons and the weapon of choice is the Glock. If it's an existing agency, for example, and everyone has weapons, but yet you want to go to a Glock, I think that's probably a different justification because the question is going to be, well, hey, you already have weapons. Why do you need that?
That makes, I didn't know if we need to go through and figure out all the costs for everything, so.
No, but and like Chief said, it just reminded me. I went through this process with weapons. Our state patrol wanted to go from a 40 to a 45, and they had to justify and they had to provide proof and evidence of why a 45 was more important and was necessary for a patrol officer to have versus the 40 they already had. And we wound up compromising and that we allowed them to utilize they had to sell their old Glocks. And pretty much because for our state patrol, the Glock serial number is actually the badge number of the patrol officer. So most of them just purchased their own. So they had their own personal 40s that had the state patrol symbol and their badge number on it. And then they purchased 45s with the money that they received from their own employees.
Now,
But
sometimes there's life throws you something that helps the justification. So when I was with LA, we had the North Hollywood shootout, and that became a beneficial transition for the department to go from 9mm to a heavier load. And so kind of was that one incident was able to justify a lot of things that changed then, like not only supervisors could carry rifles, so on and so forth. So sometimes you've got to leverage an unfortunate event into something that can benefit you.
yeah. Okay. Difference between position management and personnel management. Anybody want to take a stab? There's a lot of words on this page. Nobody wants to take a stab. Position management is dealing with a position number, and I know position number probably isn't the right word either, but a position management is an actual position. So, patrol officer 435. That is the position number of the patrol officer. That is not the officer's employee number, right? So what we're doing is it's regardless of what employee is in that position has duties and jobs and responsibilities, right? Personnel management is managing employees, right? That is managing that individual officer, not the position. So why do we care the difference between position management and personnel management? The number one reason why I feel like we need to care is, and it might not be the number one reason for Chief and for y'all, but when we look at when we want to create new positions, a lot of times we have an idea in our head of who we want in that position, and we develop a job description based on a person instead of the position. That is bad. That is merging position management and personnel management together, because then what happens is when that person finally does leave, because everybody leaves eventually, nobody lives forever. Now you have a position that is going to be hard for somebody else to fit. And on top of that, you may not have gotten everything that you needed out of that position. So when we look at position management and when you look at HR, there are multiple facets of HR, right? People that manage these positions, they're managing what is that job description and what is it based on what your strategic plan is. So if you are looking for, we want to work in this direction and we want to do these things and we want to hire somebody that's going to help us do these things, well, that person is going to be that subject matter expert to do that research for you and find out, okay, what are these key skills that this position needs? Not what are these skills that this person has that fits into it. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Chief, I put a lot of stuff on here and I don't even remember why I put some of these things on here. But
We're fully in alignment on what you just said, though, because I'm going through a nightmare now of a physician that has been where it's been woven between the person's traits and skills and that position. And it's like you said, it's nearly impossible to now fill that position because it's so uniquely written.
yes,
It's a
so
great point.
yeah, we really need to keep them separate. We really. So then we look at, okay, so when we talk about position management, we're creating all of these positions. Now we need to structure these positions. How should they be structured? And I list these three: hierarchical, matrix, and flat. And I think I do have another slide that goes through each one of these and, the pros and cons of each of them. What we see in law enforcement typically is a hierarchical structure, right? Does anybody have a flat structure? And there might be a very small law enforcement agency somewhere that has a flat structure. Your patrol officer reports directly to your chief. Everybody is pretty much equal. You outsource for your investigations to the county. You outsource your dispatchers to the county. You don't really have any crew. You're literally just, I go out there and I patrol and that's it. Anybody have one of those? Cool. So we're all pretty much in agreement that we have a hierarchical structure pretty much everywhere in law enforcement, right? So in that hierarchical structure, now we have to look at, okay, how are we going to classify these people? Because obviously we've got people that are higher up on that scale, that they should have a higher pay. However, in some of these things, when we look at these, where's my mouse? These classification and compensation systems, there's lots of different ways you can do this. But say we had step increases, and you have, $50,000 as a patrol officer, and they get step increases, and they never went above patrol officer, and they've been there for 30 years. They might be at $80,000 if you've never had a cap on your step increase. However, your sergeants start in at 60,000. Now you have got an issue in your classification compensation system. And how do you solve that issue? So one of the things that I wanted to hear from everybody is, and I'm assuming that everybody knows some of these things. So pay scales are literally that. The federal government, they have the GS scales. Local governments, they might have like scale 1 through 20. But usually what that means is, 1 is your least paid person and 20 is your highest paid person. Some, they even go above into letters instead of numbers. So you have an EX. And within that scale, you have a minimum, a median, and a maximum. And the minimum is you can't make any less than this. The maximum is you can't make any more than this. So what that pay scale does is it allows you to give somebody pay raises throughout the years. And if they stayed in that same position for 30 years, it doesn't matter that everybody's still getting 2% pay raises. They're going to max out at a number. So unless they're going to get more, a promotion or something like that, they are never going to get any more money regardless, unless the pay scale changes. There's benefits and negatives to that as well. Then you have, the pay scales and the step increases. Those are the main ones, but you also have, you give pay based on experience. So you can be a patrol officer, and if you have no experience at all and no college education, you get 50,000. But however, if you have a college degree, we're going to start you at 60,000. So now you have a pay differential, even though they're doing that same job, right? And that can be issues at sometimes, but it can be benefits at sometimes. And then if you're in various locations or, some places, if you're working the midnight shift, you get a differential pay. You get hazard duty pay if you're working in certain locations. what I'd like to hear from everybody is, what does your composition look like? Are you utilizing all of these things? Are you utilizing just one or two of these things? And then where do you see the negatives in what is missing out of your compensation system? What issues arise because of the system that you have? Who wants to start? Anthony. Greg.
I was just
So,
saying, Anthony.
Oh, Anthony.
yeah. So we actually just kind of went through a little adjustment because of some of the things you just talked about, Dr. Kerner. We're kind of interesting because all of our exempt employees are on a different scale than our rest of our department, our officers. Officers are all on step and grade system. We're on a different performance-based system, all of our civilian staff and otherwise. So what ended up just happening was we had some long-term exempt employees, some captains that had retired, and I had to promote a couple more captains. Well, we kind of quickly found out that because of that discrepancy between the step and grade scale and the performance-based scale, our sergeants, with a little bit of overtime, which is constantly happening, were outpacing our captains by a long shot. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to make that work and to make it fair.
And hopefully your HR department helped you with that, because they should be the experts on how to do this. So when we talk about, evidence-based research and data, they should be up on board with all of that stuff. Kyle, I'm not sure who exactly was next. So Kyle.
Yeah, so in our organization, we have a pay scale system. So our officer salary range is 82,000 to 110, and then it's a 5-year top out. So we basically have equal raises every year annually until you reach that top out. One of the things that hinders us is that our professional staff, they're on a different pay scale through the city, and they pretty much have it like a 13 to 15-year top out. They have kind of that minimum, mid, and max, and so it creates some issues there with our professional staff and sworn staff. But one of the benefits, our HR every year does a market analysis. We have 10 comparison cities within the DFW Metroplex, and our goal is always to be in that top third. So we really don't have a cap. We've been fortunate; we get a raise every year, and it's kind of kept our officers pretty happy. So we stay competitive in the market, and because of that annual adjustment.
Good. View.
Yeah, so we use the step increases. It's based on what we call benchmarks. So you have to reach certain benchmarks to get them. Pretty much going to get it every year. The one drawback is being a state agency, it's all dependent on the legislature funding the money that year to ensure that pay raise. Some years we use some vacancy savings or turnover savings to bolster that, but that's the limitation of it, is just making sure it's funded.
Absolutely. And funding is always an issue. In our state, we went, I think, 6 years without any increases at all because they never gave us funding for it. And our agencies weren't willing to redirect. Matt.
So we do pay scales with step increases. So you have your step is essentially your years of service. So what that caused was people getting promoted from the top end of corporal to sergeant immediately went to the top end of sergeant. So a brand new, like a newly promoted sergeant who was topped out as a corporal, leapfrogged a sergeant that had been a sergeant for about 5 or 6 years. I'm currently the senior lieutenant in the Arlington County Police Department, but the lowest paid because of that because I got promoted early. Essentially, I'm a victim of my own success, but they're fixing that now. They're going through, we have collective bargaining for the first time ever. We're in our first collective bargaining agreement, so that's all changing right now. So everything on that list is something that we're dealing with in Northern Virginia right now, and it is very difficult to stay competitive because everybody is trying to leapfrog each other, and it's been tough.
And I really hope that when y'all did your interviews with, your HR manager, they brought up that this is something that they do and that they struggle with, because it gets back to what is fair and equitable for all, and there's different meanings of that. Laura.
I hope my problem is a little unique. We have pay scales and steps, I think pretty traditionally, but our treasurer does not believe in sharing that document with our employees. He thinks it causes more questions and he doesn't like to be questioned. So while they get their yearly raise, they have no way of checking to know if it's correct. I think it's absolutely horrific. But that's our unique downside. The other thing I was going to bring up is the impact of laterals sometimes on these structures, because you're trying to attract them, you're trying to bring them in. Obviously, can bring a lot to your organization, but then where does that put them in your pay scale and steps, and how does that impact your employees that have been there, their career or for the same amount of time, and what that looks like?
Laura, I feel sorry for you. I mean, we're all government entities. This should be open records. So I do.
So it's funny, Dr. Kilmer. I want to tell them to file an MPIA, but I don't.
Joe.
Yeah, I was gonna say do the open request also. And we bring laterals in generally at the salary that they're making. So it generally doesn't cause an issue, but it's just something to think about. Otherwise, it's hard to be competitive.
Yeah. All right. So this was just really quick, and I'm not going to go into this because we are already over an hour. But just differences between the hierarchical and the matrix and the flat. So if you wanted to look at this when you get the recording, you can just fast forward to this slide. But I wanted to do it just so you could see a little bit of the differences and the advantages and disadvantages of each one of them. We're not going to go over questions. What motivates our employees? And the last time I taught this class, we spent a lot of time on this, and I'm sorry that we're not going to, unless Chief Murphy wants to spend a lot more time on this. But why do we care about motivation? And of course, we care about wanting to motivate our employees because we want to make sure that they enjoy working for us, they enjoy their job, they're going to continue to perform high. I mean, we all know how easy it is to get into a rut. We all, in public safety, we're always under pressure, and we're always in fear for we might not go home tonight. So it's very easy sometimes, just in mindset. Stress can do it, burnout can do it, just mindset of, I don't really want to perform tonight, right? I'm going to go sit in a corner somewhere just because I need it all. So it's really important to make sure that we are motivating our employees so they are excited about coming to work every night. And that can be very high. But the rewarding side of it is, if we continue to keep them motivated, then they're going to stay longer, and we're not going to have that turnover rate. We're not going to have that vacancy rate. We might not even have as much of a need for overtime, right? So I really just wanted to quickly talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic. We should have read through this within our chapter, but I just wanted to go over really quick. An extrinsic motivation strategy is very short-lived. It's very short-term. However, that intrinsic motivation strategy is meant to be a longer term. It's meant to truly get into the core purpose of being, of why this person wants to be here. And trying to motivate that way can be much harder than that external motivation strategy. It's very easy to give somebody a competitive salary and they're like, hell yeah, I'm coming to work for this agency because they're going to start me off on, $10,000 more than this other agency, but that will wear off. It always wears off. It's not going to stay there forever. So then you're going to have to constantly be giving them more money. Giving them that work-life balance and that scheduling, it's great, but then, it's one of these things, we talk about, everybody wants a 4-day work week. We work 5 days a week, everybody wants a 4-day work week. So we change it to 10 hours a day and everybody wants that. Everybody's got that 4-day work week. Now all of a sudden they want that 3-day work week. And it's a very short-lived reward, because what is work-life balance? And I'm a huge abuser of this because my work-life balance is 0. I work, I don't have a life, but it's different for everybody. I enjoy my work-life balance the way it is right now. If I had more free time, I probably would go stir crazy. So I enjoy the work. But it's very subjective to who it is you're talking to, and it will continuously change. It's a very short-lived reward. Wellness and fitness programs, I'm hoping and assuming that some of y'all have these things to where you might pay for gym memberships for people. One of the recent things that my agency is doing is you get free Weight Watchers, I think it is. And you don't have to pay the monthly fees, and you can have all the benefits of a Weight Watchers program. They allow us to go to the university gym for free. So those types of things, they're very short-lived because so many people, they're like, hell, I get to go to the gym for free. I don't have to pay for the gym anymore. This is great. I'm signing up for the gym. I can't believe my employer is just amazing. And they use it for a few months and they're like, you know what? I don't want that gym. This isn't a benefit. I can't believe that I'm doing this, right? However, when we look at that intrinsic, how do we develop that sense of purpose, and how do we recognize people and appreciate people continuously, not just every once in a while? One of the things is through that career development. When you see somebody that does have leadership potential, you're investing time and effort into them. You're singling them out, and you're developing them to be one of the future leaders. You're doing your succession planning. They are motivated because they see that you have an interest in them. You have an interest in their well-being and their career trajectory. Unlike if we were just gonna, give them a bonus and give them a 1-a-day award or public recognition. And I know that we all do that. I remember we would have the annual Christmas party and we would give out awards that one day a year, and everybody was excited about that one day a year. But then what happened 6 months down the road, everybody was back to normal again. The recognition went away, right? So how can we keep that recognition and appreciation continuous and all the time, and people looking forward to it? Greg says next week he wants to circle back to it a bit, and that's good because I really don't want to go much over this, and we probably can talk a lot about this. I think that is the end. Yeah. So there were some discussion questions there, but I really don't want to go much into it. So anybody have any comments about what we talked about, or do we want to let Greg pick it up next week? No comments from anybody? All right. Any questions? Your budget submission will be due next weekend. I know that I have not looked at the assignments from last week yet. Hopefully I can get to them tomorrow. But I'll get those grades out for mine as soon as I possibly can. Any questions from anybody? I think we've lost a couple people already. I'm sorry. All right, well, if not, reach out to me. Like I said, text is better than emails. I feel bad. I know I've seen some emails come through and they might be a day or so old, so please text me if you need anything, okay? And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
See
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.